The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Harrison as Sarah Martinez stepped off the transport bus, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder and determination burning in her dark eyes. At 22, she was one of the youngest recruits to enter the elite military training program, but her background in martial arts and her unwavering spirit had earned her a place among the chosen few. The base buzzed with activity as soldiers marched in formation, their boots creating a rhythmic thunder against the concrete. Sarah had grown up in a small town in Texas, where her father ran a martial arts studio and her mother worked as a nurse. From the age of 5, she had trained in multiple fighting disciplines, earning black belts in karate, taekwondo, and jiu-jitsu before she graduated high school. Her parents had taught her that strength wasn't just about physical power, but about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. When she decided to join the military, it wasn't for glory or adventure, but because she believed in serving something greater than herself. The intake process was grueling. Hundreds of recruits had applied for the program, but only 50 had been selected. Sarah found herself surrounded by men and women from all walks of life, each bringing their own skills and backgrounds to the table. There were former college athletes, martial artists like herself, and even a few who had overcome significant personal challenges to earn their place here. The diversity was impressive, but Sarah quickly noticed something that made her stomach tighten with unease. Sergeant Major Rick Donovan commanded attention the moment he entered any room. Standing at 6 feet 4 inches with a muscular frame built from years of military service, he carried himself with the kind of authority that made people instinctively step aside. His uniform was always perfectly pressed, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his gray eyes seemed to miss nothing. At 45, he had served in 3 overseas deployments and had earned numerous commendations for his leadership and tactical skills. On paper, he was the perfect soldier and leader. But Sarah noticed things that others seemed to overlook or ignore. The way Donovan's eyes lingered too long on female recruits during inspections. How his voice carried a different tone when addressing women compared to men. The subtle comments he made that could be interpreted as harmless jokes but felt loaded with something darker. During her first week, she witnessed him berating a young female recruit named Lisa for a minor uniform infraction, his voice escalating to a level that seemed excessive for such a small mistake. The training regimen was intense by design. Days began at 5 in the morning with physical conditioning that pushed every recruit to their limits. Running, climbing, combat training, weapons handling, and tactical exercises filled their schedules from dawn to dusk. Sarah excelled in most areas, particularly in hand-to-hand combat training, where her martial arts background gave her a significant advantage. She could hold her own against recruits who outweighed her by 50 pounds or more, using technique and speed to overcome brute strength. During combat training sessions, Sarah began to notice a pattern in Donovan's behavior that troubled her deeply. When pairing recruits for sparring sessions, he would often match smaller female recruits against much larger male opponents, claiming it would prepare them for real-world scenarios. While there was some truth to this logic, Sarah observed that he seemed to take particular pleasure when the women struggled or got hurt during these mismatched fights. One afternoon, during a particularly brutal training session, Sarah watched as Donovan paired Lisa, who couldn't have weighed more than 120 pounds, against Marcus, a former college football player who stood 6 feet 2 and weighed over 200 pounds. The exercise was supposed to be about defensive techniques and controlled sparring, but Marcus, either not understanding the assignment or caught up in the intensity of the moment, delivered a hard blow to Lisa's ribs that sent her to the ground gasping for air. Instead of stopping the exercise and checking on Lisa's condition, Donovan stood over her with his arms crossed and a slight smirk on his face. "Get up, Martinez," he barked, using Lisa's last name incorrectly. "The enemy isn't going to wait for you to catch your breath." Lisa struggled to her feet, clearly in pain, but Donovan ordered the exercise to continue. Sarah felt her hands clench into fists as she watched, but she knew that speaking out as a new recruit could end her military career before it truly began. The incident with Lisa was not isolated. Over the following weeks, Sarah documented a pattern of behavior that seemed designed to humiliate and intimidate female recruits. Donovan would assign them extra duties for minor infractions while ignoring similar mistakes made by male recruits. During inspections, he would stand uncomfortably close to female soldiers, his presence clearly intended to intimidate rather than instruct. He made comments about their physical capabilities that went beyond constructive criticism and into the realm of personal attacks. Sarah found herself walking a difficult line. Her instincts told her to confront Donovan directly, but her training and understanding of military hierarchy held her back. She had worked too hard to get here to throw it all away on what others might perceive as an overreaction to tough training methods. The military had always been a male-dominated institution, and she knew that women had to prove themselves twice as hard to earn respect and credibility. But Sarah's martial arts training had taught her more than just fighting techniques. Her father had emphasized the importance of reading people, understanding their motivations, and recognizing when someone posed a genuine threat. Every instinct she had developed over years of training told her that Donovan was dangerous, not just as a tough drill instructor, but as someone who enjoyed exerting power over those he perceived as weaker. The breaking point came during the third week of training. The recruits had been divided into teams for a complex tactical exercise that would test everything they had learned so far. Sarah found herself assigned to a team with Lisa and 3 male recruits under Donovan's direct supervision. The exercise was designed to simulate a rescue mission, with one team member playing the role of a captured civilian while the others planned and executed a rescue operation. Donovan assigned Lisa to play the captured civilian, a role that required her to be bound and placed in a mock prison cell while the rest of the team developed their rescue strategy. What should have been a straightforward training exercise took on a sinister tone as Donovan spent an excessive amount of time ensuring that Lisa was properly secured, his hands lingering as he checked the restraints, and his comments becoming increasingly inappropriate. "We need to make sure our prisoner can't escape," he said with a grin that made Sarah's skin crawl. In real situations, captives don't always cooperate, especially when they're scared. His eyes never left Lisa's face as he spoke, and Sarah could see the fear and discomfort in the young recruit's expression. The other male team members seemed oblivious to the undercurrent of menace in Donovan's behavior, focused instead on planning their tactical approach to the exercise. As the exercise progressed, Sarah found herself making excuses to check on Lisa, ostensibly to gather intelligence for the rescue mission, but really to ensure that Donovan wasn't crossing any lines while alone with the vulnerable recruit. Each time she approached the mock prison area, she found Donovan standing closer to Lisa than necessary, his voice low and his comments becoming more personal and less professional. The exercise concluded without any major incidents, but Sarah could see that Lisa was shaken by the experience. That evening, during their brief free time before lights out, Sarah approached Lisa privately. The young woman was sitting alone in the barracks, staring out the window with a troubled expression that spoke volumes about her state of mind. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked quietly, sitting down beside Lisa on the narrow bunk. That exercise seemed pretty intense. Lisa turned to look at her, and Sarah could see tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "I don't know if I can do this," Lisa whispered. "It's not the physical training or even the mental challenges. It's him. Sergeant Major Donovan makes me feel like I'm not safe here." Sarah felt her heart clench with anger and sympathy. She had suspected that Lisa was struggling with more than just the demanding training regimen, but hearing it confirmed made her realize that action needed to be taken. "What do you mean? Has he done something specific?" Lisa hesitated, clearly torn between her desire to speak out and her fear of the consequences. "It's not any one thing," she finally said. "It's the way he looks at me, the things he says when no one else is around. During today's exercise, he kept making comments about how helpless I looked and asking if I was scared. It felt wrong, like he was enjoying it too much." Sarah felt a cold rage building in her chest. She had seen enough predatory behavior in her life to recognize it when it appeared, and everything about Donovan's conduct screamed danger. But she also knew that accusations without concrete evidence could destroy both her and Lisa's military careers while accomplishing nothing to stop Donovan's behavior. "Have you thought about reporting it?" Sarah asked carefully. Lisa shook her head immediately. "Report what? That he made me uncomfortable? That he looked at me wrong? You know as well as I do that they'll just say I can't handle tough training and send me home. Meanwhile, he'll know I complained, and that will make everything worse." Sarah understood Lisa's dilemma perfectly. The military's track record on handling sexual harassment and assault complaints was mixed at best, and junior recruits who complained about senior officers often found their careers derailed regardless of the validity of their concerns. The system was supposed to protect victims, but, in practice, it often protected the institution and its leadership at the expense of individual soldiers. That night, Sarah lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with her conscience. Everything in her background and training told her to stand up and fight when she witnessed injustice. But the reality of military hierarchy and politics complicated any simple response. She thought about her father's teachings, about the responsibility that came with strength and skill. He had always told her that power without purpose was meaningless, and that true strength came from protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As the days passed, Sarah began to develop a plan. She couldn't directly confront Donovan without evidence and witnesses, but she could position herself to be present whenever he interacted with female recruits. She volunteered for extra duties that would keep her in close proximity to training areas where incidents might occur. She began documenting everything she observed, keeping detailed notes about dates, times, and witnesses to Donovan's inappropriate behavior. The opportunity for direct action came sooner than Sarah had expected. 2 weeks after her conversation with Lisa, the recruits were scheduled for a major demonstration exercise in front of visiting military officials and dignitaries. Over 1,000 soldiers would be present as the recruits showcased the skills they had learned during their training. It was meant to be a celebration of their progress and a demonstration of the military's commitment to excellence in training and preparation. The demonstration was scheduled to take place in the base's main parade ground, a large open area surrounded by bleachers that could accommodate the massive audience. The recruits had been practicing for weeks, perfecting their synchronized movements and tactical demonstrations. Sarah knew that this event would provide the perfect opportunity for something significant to happen, though she had no idea how prophetic that instinct would prove to be. As the day of the demonstration approached, tension among the recruits reached a fever pitch. Everyone understood that their performance would be evaluated not just by their immediate superiors, but by high-ranking officials who could influence their future assignments and career trajectories. The pressure was immense, and Sarah noticed that Donovan seemed to be taking particular pleasure in the stress and anxiety that surrounded the upcoming event. The night before the demonstration, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She approached Lisa and several other female recruits who had expressed similar concerns about Donovan's behavior. "Tomorrow is our chance," she told them quietly. "With all those witnesses present, he won't be able to hide behind his rank or the chain of command if something happens. We need to be ready to support each other no matter what occurs." None of them knew exactly what Sarah meant, but they all understood that change was coming. The question was whether they would be prepared to face whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. The morning of the demonstration dawned crisp and clear, with a cloudless sky that promised perfect conditions for the outdoor ceremony. Sarah woke before the official reveille, her body tense with anticipation and her mind racing through the possibilities that the day might bring. Around her, fellow recruits were going through their morning routines with the mechanical precision that had been drilled into them over weeks of intensive training. The base was transformed for the occasion. Flags flew from every available pole, bleachers had been arranged in perfect rows around the parade ground, and a temporary reviewing stand had been erected for the visiting dignitaries. Sarah could see maintenance crews making final adjustments to the public address system and security personnel conducting their preliminary sweeps of the area. Everything had to be perfect for what was being billed as a showcase of military excellence and training innovation. As the recruits assembled for their final briefing, Sarah caught sight of the arriving audience members. Senior military officers in dress uniforms, local government officials, and even some family members of recruits filled the bleachers with a sea of faces that numbered well over 1,000 people. The scope of the audience was both thrilling and intimidating, knowing that their performance would be witnessed by so many important figures. Sergeant Major Donovan appeared even more imposing than usual in his dress uniform, every ribbon and medal perfectly aligned, his bearing radiating the confidence of someone who knew he was about to showcase his training methods to a prestigious audience. Sarah noticed how his eyes swept over the female recruits with what she now recognized as predatory satisfaction. Today was his day to demonstrate his authority and control, and she could sense his anticipation for the power he would wield in front of such a significant crowd. The demonstration was structured to showcase different aspects of military training and readiness. It would begin with precision drill formations, followed by physical fitness demonstrations, tactical exercises, and culminate in hand-to-hand combat showcases that would highlight the recruits' fighting skills and readiness for real-world scenarios. Each segment had been rehearsed dozens of times, but Sarah knew that the pressure of performing in front of such a large audience could cause even the most prepared recruits to make mistakes. During the initial formations, everything proceeded flawlessly. The recruits moved with synchronized precision, their uniforms immaculate, and their bearing exemplifying military discipline and pride. Sarah felt a surge of genuine pride as she participated in the demonstration, knowing that the months of grueling training were being displayed for everyone to see. The audience responded with appreciative applause, and even the typically stoic senior officers seemed pleased with what they were witnessing. The physical fitness demonstrations showcased the remarkable conditioning that the recruits had achieved during their training. Obstacle courses, rope climbing, and endurance challenges highlighted the transformation that each recruit had undergone since arriving at the base. Sarah excelled in these segments, her martial arts background and natural athleticism allowing her to complete each challenge with grace and power that drew murmurs of appreciation from the watching crowd. But it was during the tactical exercises that Sarah began to notice troubling signs in Donovan's behavior. As the recruits demonstrated room-clearing techniques and hostage rescue scenarios, Donovan's commentary to the audience took on an increasingly personal tone when describing the female participants. His explanations of their techniques included unnecessary references to their physical attributes and capabilities that had nothing to do with their tactical skills. As you can see, Donovan announced through the public address system as Lisa demonstrated a defensive technique. Our female recruits required different approaches to combat training due to their natural physical limitations. His words carried an undertone of condescension that made Sarah's jaw clench with anger. We've developed specialized techniques to help them compensate for their inherent disadvantages in strength and aggression. Sarah could see Lisa's face flush with embarrassment and anger as Donovan's words echoed across the parade ground. The implication that female soldiers were inherently inferior was not only wrong, but deliberately humiliating in front of such a prestigious audience. Several of the watching officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly recognizing the inappropriate nature of Donovan's commentary. The situation escalated during the hand-to-hand combat demonstrations. This segment was designed to showcase the fighting skills that recruits had developed and their ability to handle themselves in close-quarters combat situations. Pairs of recruits would demonstrate various techniques, while Donovan provided expert commentary on their form and effectiveness. Sarah had been looking forward to this portion of the demonstration, knowing that her martial arts background would allow her to showcase skills that might change some perceptions about female capabilities in combat. However, when the time came to announce the demonstration pairs, Donovan made assignments that immediately raised red flags for Sarah. Rather than matching recruits of similar size and skill levels, as had been done during rehearsals, he began pairing smaller female recruits against much larger male opponents. When questioned by one of the observing officers about these matchings, Donovan explained that real combat situations wouldn't offer the luxury of fair fights. In actual combat, he announced to the crowd, his voice carrying the authority of experience, our soldiers don't get to choose their opponents based on size or gender. These demonstrations will show you how our training prepares even our smallest recruits to face larger, stronger adversaries. His explanations sounded reasonable on the surface, but Sarah could see the malicious intent behind his words. Lisa was among the first to be called forward, paired against Marcus, the same recruit who had injured her during the earlier training exercise. Sarah could see the fear in Lisa's eyes as she stepped into the demonstration area, knowing that she was being set up for failure and humiliation in front of 1,000 witnesses. The crowd fell silent as the two recruits took their positions, the size disparity obvious to everyone present. The demonstration began with basic defensive techniques, and Lisa performed adequately despite her obvious nervousness. But, as the exercise progressed, Donovan's instructions became more aggressive, calling for techniques that would put Lisa at a serious disadvantage. Show them how you handle a larger attacker, he commanded, his voice carrying across the silent parade ground. Real enemies won't go easy on you just because you're smaller. Marcus, following orders and caught up in the intensity of the moment, began to apply more force than appropriate for a demonstration. Lisa struggled to maintain her defensive posture as Marcus's attacks became more realistic and less controlled. The crowd watched in uncomfortable silence as what should have been a technical demonstration turned into something that looked more like an actual fight. Sarah watched in growing anger as Donovan stood with his arms crossed, clearly enjoying Lisa's struggle and the discomfort it was creating among the watching audience. He could have stopped the exercise at any point or provided guidance to help Lisa demonstrate her skills more effectively, but instead he allowed the mismatch to continue. seemingly savoring the humiliation he was inflicting. When Lisa finally lost her footing and fell hard to the ground, the impact audible even in the large open space, Sarah had seen enough. Without waiting for permission or considering the consequences, she stepped forward from her position in the formation. "Sergeant Major," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the parade ground. "I request permission to demonstrate proper defensive techniques against a larger opponent." Donovan turned towards Sarah with surprise and irritation clearly visible on his face. Being interrupted during his demonstration, especially by a recruit, was a serious breach of protocol that could result in severe disciplinary action. But, with 1,000 witnesses watching, including senior officers and dignitaries, he couldn't simply dismiss her request without appearing unreasonable. "Martinez," he said, his voice cold with warning, "you will return to your position in formation immediately." But Sarah had made her decision, and there was no turning back. "Sir, I believe I can better demonstrate the defensive techniques that recruit Lisa was attempting to show. I have extensive martial arts training and can showcase how proper technique allows smaller fighters to overcome size disadvantages." A murmur ran through the crowd as they witnessed this unprecedented challenge to authority. Senior officers leaned forward with interest, clearly curious to see how Donovan would handle this unexpected development. Family members and guests whispered among themselves, sensing that something significant was happening even if they didn't fully understand the military protocols being challenged. Donovan's face flushed with anger, but he was trapped by the circumstances. To refuse Sarah's request in front of such an audience would make him appear inflexible and possibly afraid of being shown up by a female recruit. To accept would mean allowing a challenge to his authority that could undermine his position if Sarah succeeded in demonstrating superior skills. "Very well, Martinez," he said finally, his voice dripping with contempt. "Since you seem to think you can do better, you'll demonstrate against me personally. Let's see how your martial arts training holds up against real military combat experience." The crowd fell into complete silence as the implications of this challenge became clear. A recruit was about to face off against a sergeant major in front of 1,000 witnesses. The breach of military protocol was staggering, but the momentum of the moment had carried them past the point where anyone could reasonably intervene without creating an even bigger spectacle. Sarah felt her heart racing as she stepped forward to face Donovan, but her mind was calm and focused in the way that years of martial arts training had taught her to achieve in moments of confrontation. She could see the anger and arrogance in Donovan's eyes, and she knew that he intended to use this opportunity to humiliate her completely and definitively in front of everyone present. Since Martinez has such confidence in her abilities, Donovan announced to the crowd, his voice now carrying a tone of dark satisfaction, "We'll demonstrate some advanced combat techniques. This will show you what our recruits might face in real-world situations against experienced enemy combatants." As they took their positions in the center of the demonstration area, Sarah could feel the weight of 1,000 watching eyes. Senior officers sat forward in their seats, clearly concerned about where this unprecedented situation was heading. Fellow recruits watched with a mixture of admiration and terror, knowing that Sarah was risking everything by challenging established authority in such a public forum. Donovan's initial movements were controlled and technical, designed to demonstrate his superior training and experience. But Sarah could see the real anger beneath his professional facade, and she knew that his restraint wouldn't last long. Years of training had taught her to read her opponents, and everything about Donovan's body language told her that he was building towards something much more aggressive than a simple demonstration. The turning point came when Sarah successfully countered one of Donovan's attempted grappling techniques, using his momentum against him to break free from what should have been a controlling hold. The crowd gasped as they witnessed the smaller recruit outmaneuvering the experienced sergeant major, and Sarah could see the flash of genuine rage that crossed Donovan's features. "You think you're smart, Martinez?" Donovan growled, his voice low enough that only Sarah could hear, but his anger now visible to everyone watching. "Let me show you what real combat looks like." What happened next would be replayed in the minds of every witness for years to come. Donovan abandoned any pretense of controlled demonstration and launched a vicious attack that was clearly intended to seriously injure rather than instruct. His fist came towards Sarah's face with the full force of his considerable strength and weight behind it, aimed at an angle and with an intensity that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with punishment. The sound of impact echoed across the silent parade ground, but it wasn't the sound that Donovan had intended. Instead of connecting with Sarah's face, his punch had been deflected by a defensive technique so smooth and efficient that many witnesses weren't immediately sure what they had seen. Sarah had redirected his attack, while simultaneously stepping inside his guard, positioning herself for a counterattack that came with lightning speed and devastating precision. In the shocked silence that followed, Sergeant Major Rick Donovan lay unconscious on the demonstration ground, his body motionless and his reputation shattered before 1,000 witnesses. Sarah stood over him, her breathing controlled and her stance still prepared for further action, though it was clear that none would be needed. The impossible had happened. A female recruit had knocked out a sergeant major in front of the most prestigious military audience that Fort Harrison had ever assembled. The silence that followed Donovan's collapse was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. 1,000 people sat frozen in their seats, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The impossible had become reality in the space of a few seconds, and now everyone present was trying to understand the implications of what had transpired on the demonstration ground. Medical personnel rushed onto the field within moments, their training taking over even as they grappled with the unprecedented nature of the situation. 2 combat medics knelt beside Donovan's motionless form, checking his pulse and breathing while carefully examining his head for signs of serious injury. Sarah remained standing exactly where she had been when her counterattack landed, her body still in a defensive stance, and her eyes alert for any sign that Donovan might regain consciousness and resume his attack. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base commander, was the first senior officer to break from her shock and take action. A 20-year veteran with combat experience in 3 different theaters, Hayes had seen her share of unexpected situations, but nothing had prepared her for watching one of her sergeant majors get knocked unconscious by a recruit during a public demonstration. She strode onto the field with the kind of purposeful authority that comes from years of command experience. Everyone remained calm and in position, Hayes announced through the public address system, her voice carrying the kind of steady confidence that could calm even the most chaotic situations. Medical personnel will attend to Sergeant Major Donovan while we assess the situation. All recruits will maintain their current positions until further notice. Sarah felt the weight of hundreds of stares as she stood motionless in the center of the demonstration area. Fellow recruits watched her with expressions ranging from awe to terror, understanding that her actions had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Senior officers huddled in urgent consultation, their voices too low to hear, but their body language conveying the gravity of what had occurred. The medical assessment revealed that Donovan had suffered a concussion, but no permanent injury. Sarah's counterattack had been precisely calculated to incapacitate without causing lasting damage, a testament to her years of martial arts training and the discipline that had been instilled in her from childhood. As the medics helped him to a sitting position, Donovan's eyes were unfocused and his movements unsteady, but he was conscious and apparently unaware of exactly what had happened to him. Colonel Hayes approached Sarah with an expression that revealed nothing about her intentions or assessment of the situation. Behind her came Major Jennifer Torres, the base's legal officer, and Captain Michael Chun, who served as the primary investigator for serious incidents involving military personnel. Sarah recognized that her actions would now be subject to the kind of scrutiny that could determine not just her military career, but potentially her freedom. "Recruit Martinez," Colonel Hayes said, her voice neutral but carrying an undertone of steel that commanded absolute attention. "You will accompany these officers for debriefing immediately. You are not under arrest at this time, but you are ordered not to discuss this incident with anyone until the investigation is complete." As Sarah was escorted away from the demonstration area, she caught sight of Lisa and several other female recruits watching her with expressions of gratitude and concern. Whatever consequences she was about to face, Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that she had finally taken action against someone who had been abusing his position of authority. The fear and intimidation that had defined their training experience might finally be coming to an end. The debriefing room was small and windowless, furnished only with a metal table and several uncomfortable chairs that had clearly seen years of use. Major Torres activated a recording device and placed it on the table between them, while Captain Chin prepared to take detailed notes of everything that would be discussed. Colonel Hayes sat across from Sarah with the kind of intense focus that made it clear this conversation would determine Sarah's immediate future. "Recruit Martinez," Hayes began, You understand that striking a superior officer is among the most serious offenses possible under military law. Before we proceed with this investigation, I want you to understand that anything you say can and will be used in any subsequent legal proceedings. You have the right to request legal representation before answering any questions. Sarah had anticipated this moment since the instant her counterattack landed. She had known that challenging Donovan would put her own future at risk, but she had also known that allowing his behavior to continue unchallenged would have consequences that went far beyond her own career. "Colonel Hayes," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I understand the gravity of the situation, but I want to make a complete statement about the events that led to this incident." What followed was the most important conversation of Sarah's life. Over the next 3 hours, she provided a detailed account of everything she had witnessed during her time in the training program. She described Donovan's pattern of inappropriate behavior toward female recruits, his deliberate attempts to humiliate and intimidate women under his command, and the escalating nature of his conduct that had culminated in what she characterized as an assault disguised as a training demonstration. Major Torres took detailed notes as Sarah recounted specific incidents, dates, and witnesses to Donovan's misconduct. The legal officer's expression grew increasingly grave as the scope and pattern of the alleged behavior became clear. Captain Chen asked probing questions designed to verify Sarah's account and identify additional witnesses who might be able to corroborate her claims. "Recruit Martinez," Colonel Hayes said when Sarah had finished her initial statement, "these are very serious allegations. If what you're telling us is accurate, then Sergeant Major Donovan's conduct represents a pattern of sexual harassment and abuse of authority that cannot be tolerated in any military unit. However, I need you to understand that your method of addressing these concerns was completely inappropriate and potentially criminal." Sarah nodded, understanding the colonel's position perfectly. "Ma'am, I attempted to address the situation through proper channels by documenting incidents and being present whenever possible to protect other recruits. But when Sergeant Major Donovan escalated to physical assault during today's demonstration, I had no choice but to defend myself using the minimum force necessary to end the threat." The investigation that followed Sarah's debriefing was unlike anything Fort Harrison had experienced in its decades of operation. Colonel Hayes ordered a complete review of Donovan's conduct dating back to his arrival at the base, while simultaneously launching a parallel investigation into Sarah's claims about systemic problems in the training program. Military Criminal Investigation Command agents arrived within hours to begin interviewing every recruit and instructor who had been involved in the program. Lisa was among the first witnesses interviewed, and her testimony corroborated every aspect of Sarah's account regarding Donovan's inappropriate behavior. Other female recruits came forward with similar stories, describing a pattern of intimidation, harassment, and deliberately humiliating treatment that painted a picture of systemic abuse within the training program. Male recruits confirmed many of the incidents, though several admitted they had been unaware of the sexual nature of Donovan's conduct. The testimony of Instructor Sergeant Maria Gonzalez proved particularly damaging to Donovan's position. Gonzalez had worked alongside Donovan for 2 years and had witnessed numerous incidents that she had been afraid to report due to his seniority and reputation. Her statement revealed that concerns about Donovan's conduct had been raised informally on multiple occasions, but the informal nature of these complaints had allowed them to be dismissed or ignored. "I saw him deliberately target female recruits for the most dangerous training exercises," Gonzalez testified. "He would pair them against much larger opponents and then refuse to stop exercises when it became clear that someone was going to get seriously hurt. When I tried to intervene on several occasions, he reminded me of the chain of command and made it clear that questioning his methods could impact my own career." The investigation also revealed that Donovan's personnel file contained several informal counseling sessions related to his interactions with female subordinates, but these had never risen to the level of formal disciplinary action. The pattern suggested an institutional failure to address warning signs that had been present for years, allowing inappropriate behavior to escalate until it reached the point of the public confrontation that had ended his career. As news of the investigation spread throughout the base, Sarah found herself in an unprecedented position. She was confined to quarters pending the completion of the investigation, but she had become something of a folk hero among female personnel who had struggled with similar issues in their own units. Messages of support were smuggled to her through various channels, and She learned that her actions had inspired other women to come forward with their own complaints about inappropriate conduct by superior officers. The media attention was intense and largely supportive of Sarah's actions. Video footage of the demonstration had been recorded by several family members in attendance, and clips of Donovan's obvious assault and Sarah's defensive response had gone viral on social media platforms. Women's advocacy groups rallied to Sarah's defense, arguing that she had been forced to defend herself against a sexual predator who was using his position of authority to target vulnerable female subordinates. Legal experts who analyzed the incident found themselves divided on the appropriate response. While Sarah had clearly violated military protocol by striking a superior officer, the circumstances of the incident and the evidence of Donovan's misconduct complicated any straightforward application of military justice. Some argued that Sarah's actions constituted justified self-defense against an assault, while others maintained that her defiance of military hierarchy could not be overlooked regardless of the underlying circumstances. The most significant development came when the investigation uncovered evidence that senior base officials had been aware of concerns about Donovan's conduct but had failed to take appropriate action. Internal emails revealed that Colonel Hayes' predecessor had received complaints about Donovan's treatment of female personnel, but had dismissed them as personality conflicts or training disputes rather than potential sexual harassment. This discovery shifted the focus of the investigation from Sarah's actions to the institutional failures that had allowed Donovan's misconduct to continue unchecked. Military oversight officials from Washington arrived to conduct their own review of base policies and procedures, particularly regarding the reporting and investigation of sexual harassment complaints. Colonel Hayes found herself in an impossible position. The evidence clearly showed that Donovan had engaged in a pattern of inappropriate conduct that violated military regulations and possibly civilian laws. However, the method by which this misconduct had been exposed created its own set of legal and disciplinary challenges that threatened to overshadow the underlying issues. The pressure on military leadership to make the right decision was enormous. Women's advocacy groups, veterans organizations, and political figures were all watching closely to see how the military would handle a case that had become symbolic of larger issues within the institution. The way this situation was resolved would send a message about the military's commitment to protecting female personnel from harassment and abuse. After 2 weeks of intensive investigation, Colonel Hayes received orders from her superiors in Washington to convene a formal court-martial to address Sarah's actions. The charges would include assault on a superior officer and violation of military discipline, but the court would also be permitted to consider the circumstances that led to the incident. It would be up to a military jury to determine whether Sarah's actions were justified given the threat she was facing. The announcement of the court-martial decision triggered another wave of media attention and public debate. Supporters organized rallies and petitions calling for all charges to be dropped, while military traditionalists argued that allowing junior personnel to strike superior officers, regardless of the circumstances, would undermine the entire structure of military discipline and authority. Sarah received the news of the court-martial with mixed emotions. While she was relieved that the investigation had exposed Donovan's misconduct and led to changes in base policies, she also understood that her own future remained uncertain. The court-martial process could result in anything from complete exoneration to a military prison sentence, and there was no way to predict how a military jury would weigh the competing factors in her case. As she prepared for what would be the legal fight of her life, Sarah reflected on the events that had brought her to this point. She had joined the military to serve her country and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. In standing up to Donovan, she had fulfilled that mission in a way she never expected, but the cost of that decision was still being calculated. The court-martial of recruit Sarah Martinez became one of the most closely watched military legal proceedings in recent memory. Media representatives from national news networks requested permission to observe the proceedings, while legal experts debated the broader implications of a case that touched on military discipline, sexual harassment, and women's rights within the armed forces. The military courtroom at Fort Harrison had never hosted such a high-profile case, and security measures were implemented to manage the unprecedented level of public interest. Captain David Walsh, a veteran military defense attorney with 15 years of experience defending service members in complex cases, was assigned to represent Sarah. Walsh had handled numerous cases involving military discipline and sexual harassment, and he understood that this case presented unique challenges that would require careful legal strategy and meticulous preparation. His first meeting with Sarah revealed a client who was intelligent, articulate, and completely committed to standing by her actions regardless of the personal consequences. "I want you to understand something from the beginning," Walsh told Sarah during their initial consultation. "The military justice system is designed to maintain order and discipline within the ranks. What you did, striking a superior officer, is considered one of the most serious offenses possible. However, the circumstances surrounding your actions and the evidence of Sergeant Major Donovan's misconduct give us grounds to argue self-defense and justification." The prosecution team was led by Major Rebecca Stone, a prosecutor known for her thorough preparation and unwavering commitment to military discipline and order. Stone understood that this case would be scrutinized far beyond the military courtroom, and she was determined to prove that personal grievances, regardless of their validity, could not justify violence against superior officers. Her opening statement would argue that Sarah's actions threatened the very foundation of military hierarchy and chain of command. The selection of the military jury was a process that both sides approached with extraordinary care. The panel would consist of 5 military officers of various ranks and backgrounds, each of whom would bring their own experiences and perspectives to their evaluation of the evidence. Defense attorney Walsh sought jury members who had experience with sexual harassment issues or who had served in leadership positions where they had dealt with misconduct allegations. Prosecutor Stone preferred jury members with strong backgrounds in military discipline and chain of command issues. The final jury panel included Colonel James Mitchell, a career infantry officer with combat experience, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chun, one of the few female officers with experience in military justice proceedings, Major Robert Taylor, a former military police officer, Captain Lisa Thompson, who had previously served as a company commander, and Captain Mark Rodriguez, a logistics officer with a background in personnel management. Each would bring different perspectives to their evaluation of Sarah's actions and the circumstances that led to the confrontation. The opening statements set the stage for a legal battle that would examine fundamental questions about authority, justice, and protection within military structures. Prosecutor Stone argued that military discipline was absolute and that allowing junior personnel to strike superior officers, regardless of provocation, would lead to chaos and the breakdown of military order. The defendant made a choice, Stone told the jury, and that choice was to use violence against a superior officer in front of 1,000 witnesses. The circumstances that led to that choice do not excuse the action itself. Defense attorney Walsh countered that Sarah had been forced to defend herself against an assault by someone who had been abusing his position of authority for months. "My client exhausted every reasonable option to address Sergeant Major Donovan's misconduct through proper channels," Walsh argued. "When he escalated to physical violence during a public demonstration, she used the minimum force necessary to protect herself from serious injury. This was not an act of insubordination, but an act of self-preservation." The prosecution's case focused on establishing the severity of Sarah's breach of military protocol and the threat that her actions posed to military order and discipline. Major Stone called witnesses to testify about the importance of chain of command and the precedent that would be set if junior personnel were permitted to use force against superior officers. Senior military officials testified about the potential consequences of allowing such behavior to go unpunished. Brigadier General Robert Hayes, who served as the regional commander overseeing multiple military installations, provided testimony that was particularly damaging to Sarah's case. "Military discipline is not optional," he stated firmly. "It is the foundation upon which all military operations depend. When junior personnel feel they can use violence against superior officers, regardless of their personal grievances, the entire system breaks down. Wars are won or lost based on the ability of subordinates to follow orders even when they disagree with them." However, the prosecution's case was significantly complicated when cross-examination revealed that General Hayes had limited knowledge of the specific circumstances surrounding Sarah's actions. Walsh's questioning established that Hayes had not reviewed the evidence of Donovan's misconduct and was testifying purely about general principles of military discipline without considering the unique factors that had led to the confrontation. The defense case began with a detailed examination of Donovan's pattern of misconduct and abuse of authority. Lisa Martinez took the stand as the first witness, providing emotional testimony about the fear and intimidation that had characterized her training experience under Donovan's supervision. Her account of the inappropriate comments, deliberate humiliation, and escalating harassment painted a picture of systematic abuse that had gone unchecked for months. He made me feel like I wasn't safe, Lisa testified, her voice breaking with emotion. It wasn't just the physical training or even the mental pressure. It was the way he looked at me, the things he said when nobody else was around, and the way he seemed to enjoy making me afraid. Sarah was the only person who stood up for us when we couldn't stand up for ourselves. Sergeant Maria Gonzalez provided crucial testimony about her observations of Donovan's conduct and her failed attempts to address the issues through informal channels. Her account revealed a pattern of institutional indifference to concerns about sexual harassment and a culture that discouraged reporting of misconduct by senior personnel. I tried to speak up, Gonzalez testified, but I was told that questioning training methods could damage my own career. The system was designed to protect people like Donovan, not his victims. The defense called several expert witnesses to establish the context for Sarah's actions and the reasonableness of her response to the threat she was facing. Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychologist specializing in sexual harassment and assault, testified about the psychological impact of the kind of systematic intimidation that Sarah had witnessed. Dr. Williams explained that victims of such harassment often experience symptoms similar to those of trauma survivors, including hypervigilance, fear, and a sense of helplessness. Master Sergeant Kevin Chun, a military martial arts instructor with 30 years of experience, provided expert testimony about the nature of Sarah's defensive techniques and the level of force she had used against Donovan. His analysis of the incident established that Sarah's counterattack had been precisely calibrated to incapacitate without causing permanent injury, demonstrating a level of control and restraint that was inconsistent with aggressive intent. The techniques that Recruit Martinez employed were defensive in nature and designed to neutralize a threat while minimizing permanent damage, Chin testified. The precision and control she demonstrated indicates someone who was defending herself rather than someone who was seeking to cause unnecessary harm. In my professional opinion, her response was proportionate to the level of threat she was facing. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Sarah herself took the stand to provide her own account of the events leading to the confrontation. Her testimony was detailed, emotional, and completely credible as she described her growing concern about Donovan's conduct and her failed attempts to protect other recruits through informal means. When she reached the moment of the actual confrontation, her voice remained steady despite the obvious emotional weight of recounting the incident. Sergeant Major Donovan's punch was aimed at my head with enough force to cause serious injury, Sarah testified. I had maybe a half second to decide how to respond. I could let him hit me and potentially be seriously hurt or knocked unconscious, or I could defend myself using the techniques I had been trained to use. I chose to protect myself while using the minimum force necessary to end the threat. Under cross-examination, Prosecutor Stone attempted to establish that Sarah could have chosen alternatives to physical confrontation, such as stepping back or calling for help from other personnel present at the demonstration. However, Sarah's responses demonstrated that the speed and aggression of Donovan's attack had left no time for such alternatives, and that her training had taught her to respond decisively to immediate physical threats. The prosecution's rebuttal case focused on establishing that Sarah's actions had alternatives and that her choice to use force was not the only option available to her. Military experts testified about protocols for addressing harassment complaints and argued that Sarah should have pursued formal channels rather than taking matters into her own hands. However, these arguments were undermined by the evidence showing that informal complaints about Donovan's conduct had been ignored for months. The testimony phase of the court-martial concluded with character witnesses for both sides. Sarah's former martial arts instructors, college professors, and military training personnel provided testimony establishing her character as someone committed to protecting others and using her skills responsibly. In contrast, character witnesses for Donovan painted a picture of a dedicated military professional whose conduct had been misinterpreted or exaggerated by individuals who couldn't handle tough training methods. The closing arguments brought together all the legal and emotional themes that had emerged during the trial. Prosecutor Stone argued that military discipline was absolute, and that personal grievances could never justify violence against superior officers, regardless of the circumstances. She emphasized the 1,000 witnesses who had observed Sarah's actions, and the precedent that would be set if her behavior was excused or justified. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Stone concluded, the defendant asks you to believe that she had no choice but to use violence against her superior officer. But choice is exactly what this case is about. She chose to take matters into her own hands rather than trust in the military justice system. She chose violence over patience. She chose insubordination over discipline. These choices cannot be excused, regardless of her personal grievances or the conduct of Sergeant Major Donovan. Defense attorney Walsh's closing argument focused on Sarah's isolation and the failure of institutional systems to protect vulnerable personnel from abuse. He argued that Sarah had been forced into an impossible situation where following proper channels had proven ineffective and where physical self-defense had become the only viable option for protecting herself and others. My client did not choose this confrontation, Walsh argued passionately. It was forced upon her by someone who had been abusing his position of authority for months, while the institution failed to protect the very people it was supposed to serve. When Sergeant Major Donovan escalated to physical assault, Sarah Martinez did exactly what she had been trained to do. She defended herself with courage, precision, and restraint. She should be commended for her actions, not court-martialed for them. The jury deliberations lasted for 3 days, during which time speculation ran rampant about the possible outcome. Legal experts were divided about the likely verdict, with some arguing that military discipline would take precedence, while others believed that the evidence of Donovan's misconduct would justify Sarah's actions. The broader public followed the proceedings through media coverage, with opinion polls showing strong support for Sarah among civilian populations. During the deliberation period, Sarah waited in confined quarters, reviewing the events that had brought her to this point and preparing herself for whatever verdict the jury might reach. She had no regrets about her actions, understanding that she had fulfilled her responsibility to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, even if the cost turned out to be her own military career and freedom. The tension in the courtroom was palpable when the jury returned with their verdict after 3 days of deliberation. Military personnel, media representatives, and legal observers filled every available seat as the panel prepared to announce their decision in a case that had captured national attention and raised fundamental questions about justice, authority, and protection within military institutions. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as Colonel James Mitchell, serving as the jury foreman, rose to deliver the verdict that would determine Sarah's fate and send a message about the military's commitment to justice and protection of vulnerable personnel. Every person present understood that this moment would be remembered as a defining point in military justice and the ongoing struggle to address sexual harassment within the armed forces. On the charge of assault on a superior officer, Colonel Mitchell announced, his voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom, "We find the defendant, recruit Sarah Martinez, not guilty." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before their meaning fully registered among the observers. A collective gasp rose from the gallery, followed by scattered applause that was quickly silenced by the military police maintaining order in the courtroom. On the charge of violation of military discipline, Mitchell continued, "We find the defendant not guilty." This second verdict triggered a more significant reaction from the observers, with several women in the gallery openly weeping with relief and gratitude. Sarah herself remained motionless at the defense table, her face showing only the slightest hint of emotion as the weight of the jury's decision began to sink in. The jury's reasoning, as explained in their written findings, reflected a careful consideration of all the evidence presented during the trial. They had concluded that Sarah's actions constituted justified self-defense against an unprovoked assault by someone who had been systematically abusing his position of authority. The panel had also found that the institutional failures that allowed Donovan's misconduct to continue unchecked had created a situation where formal complaint procedures were ineffective and potentially dangerous for victims. The evidence clearly established that recruit Martinez exhausted reasonable alternatives before resorting to physical self-defense. The jury's written statement explained. Sergeant Major Donovan's pattern of misconduct created an environment where vulnerable personnel had no effective recourse through normal channels. When he escalated to physical assault during the demonstration, recruit Martinez's response was proportionate, controlled, and necessary to protect herself from serious injury. The acquittal triggered immediate reactions from various stakeholders who had been following the case closely. Women's advocacy groups hailed the verdict as a victory for victims of sexual harassment and a sign that the military was finally taking such issues seriously. Veterans organizations were divided, with some supporting the jury's decision while others expressed concern about the precedent being set regarding military discipline and chain of command. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base commander who had overseen the investigation and trial, issued a statement emphasizing the broader lessons that needed to be learned from the case. This verdict should not be seen as permission for junior personnel to use violence against superior officers, Hayes explained. Rather, it should be understood as a call for all military leaders to create environments where harassment and abuse cannot flourish and where personnel can report misconduct without fear of retaliation. The immediate aftermath of the trial brought significant changes to Fort Harrison and the broader military training system. An investigation into institutional failures that had allowed Donovan's misconduct to continue resulted in disciplinary action against several senior officers who had ignored or dismissed complaints. New protocols were implemented for reporting and investigating sexual harassment claims, with mandatory training for all personnel on recognizing and addressing such behavior. Sergeant Major Rick Donovan faced his own legal consequences as the investigation into his conduct continued beyond Sarah's trial. Military prosecutors filed formal charges against him for sexual harassment, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming a non-commissioned officer. His military career, which had spanned over 2 decades, came to an ignominious end with a dishonorable discharge and the loss of all military benefits and retirement privileges. The broader impact of Sarah's case extended far beyond Fort Harrison to influence policy discussions at the highest levels of military leadership. Congressional hearings were held to examine the military's handling of sexual harassment complaints, with Sarah's case serving as a prominent example of both institutional failures and individual courage. New legislation was introduced to strengthen protections for service members who reported misconduct and to create independent oversight of harassment investigations. Sarah's personal journey after the trial was complex and challenging in ways she had not anticipated. While she was legally vindicated, her future in the military remained uncertain due to the notoriety of her case and the ongoing attention from media and advocacy groups. Some military leaders viewed her as a troublemaker who had disrupted military order, while others saw her as a hero who had exposed serious problems within the system. The decision about Sarah's military future ultimately came from the highest levels of military leadership in Washington. After extensive consultation with legal experts, policy advisors, and advocacy groups, it was determined that Sarah would be allowed to complete her training program and continue her military career. However, she would be transferred to a different base and placed in a program designed for personnel with specialized skills and exceptional circumstances. The transfer brought Sarah to Fort Liberty, where she was assigned to a special operations training program that recognized her unique combination of martial arts expertise and demonstrated courage under pressure. The program was designed for personnel who might be called upon to protect high-value targets or operate in situations where conventional military protocols might not be sufficient. Lisa Martinez, the young recruit whose treatment by Donovan had sparked Sarah's initial concern, also benefited from the changes that followed the trial. She was allowed to restart her training under a different instructor and eventually graduated with honors from the program. Lisa credited Sarah's courage with not only protecting her but inspiring her to complete her military service and pursue a career in military law enforcement. The relationship between Sarah and Lisa evolved into a lasting friendship built on shared experiences and mutual respect. Lisa often spoke publicly about the impact that Sarah's actions had on her life and career, emphasizing that Sarah had given her the courage to stand up for herself and pursue her dreams despite the challenges she had faced. 6 months after the trial, Sarah received an unexpected honor that reflected the military's evolving understanding of her actions and their significance. She was awarded the Soldier's Medal, the military's highest decoration for heroism not involving actual conflict with an enemy force. The citation recognized her courage in protecting fellow service members and her willingness to risk her own career to expose misconduct that threatened the welfare of others. The medal ceremony was attended by senior military officials, including General Patricia Morrison, the first female 4-star general to serve as Chief of Staff of the Army. Morrison's remarks during the ceremony emphasized that Sarah's actions represented the best traditions of military service, particularly the obligation to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Recruit Martinez demonstrated the kind of moral courage that defines true leadership, General Morrison stated during the ceremony. She saw injustice and took action to stop it, even when that action came at great personal cost. Her example reminds us that sometimes the greatest service we can provide is to stand up for what is right, regardless of the consequences. The medal ceremony also provided an opportunity for Sarah to speak publicly about her experiences and the lessons she hoped others would learn from her case. Her speech emphasized that her actions were not about challenging military authority, but about fulfilling the fundamental obligation that all service members have to protect one another. "I didn't set out to become a symbol or to challenge the military system," Sarah explained to the assembled audience. "I simply saw fellow service members being hurt and intimidated by someone who was supposed to be protecting them. My martial arts training taught me that strength should be used to protect the weak, not to exploit them. That principle doesn't change just because you put on a uniform." The changes that resulted from Sarah's case continued to evolve over the following years. The military implemented comprehensive reforms to its sexual harassment reporting and investigation procedures, creating independent oversight bodies and mandatory training programs that addressed not just the legal requirements, but the cultural changes needed to prevent such misconduct. Sarah's military career flourished in her new assignment, where her unique combination of martial arts expertise, demonstrated courage, and leadership potential made her valuable for specialized missions. She was selected for advanced training programs and eventually commissioned as an officer, rising through the ranks while maintaining her commitment to protecting vulnerable personnel and ensuring that the lessons learned from her case were not forgotten. 10 years after the incident that changed her life, Sarah had achieved the rank of major and was serving as a training officer responsible for developing new protocols for military personnel protection and harassment prevention. Her office wall displayed her soldier's medal alongside photographs of the many service members who had benefited from the reforms that grew out of her willingness to stand up against injustice. The story of Sarah Martinez became a case study taught in military academies and law schools across the country, illustrating the complex intersection of military discipline, sexual harassment, and individual courage. Her actions were examined not just as a legal precedent, but as an example of moral leadership that transcended rank and protocol. Lisa Martinez, now a lieutenant colonel serving in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, often reflected on how Sarah's courage had changed the trajectory of her own life and career. She had dedicated her legal career to protecting service members from harassment and abuse, and she frequently cited Sarah's example when training new military lawyers about the importance of standing up for victims of misconduct. The relationship between Sarah and Lisa remained strong throughout their careers, built on a foundation of shared experience and mutual respect that had been forged in the crucible of that training program years earlier. They regularly collaborated on training programs and policy development, working together to ensure that future generations of service members would have better protection and recourse when facing harassment or abuse. Rick Donovan's fall from grace served as a cautionary tale about the consequences of abusing positions of authority within the military. His case became a standard example used in leadership training programs to illustrate how misconduct can destroy careers and undermine unit effectiveness. The reforms that followed his disgrace helped prevent similar abuses and created a culture where such behavior was more likely to be reported and addressed quickly. The 1,000 witnesses who had observed the confrontation on that demonstration ground became part of a larger story about institutional change and individual courage. Many of them later spoke about how watching Sarah stand up to Donovan had influenced their own willingness to report misconduct and support victims of harassment in their own units. Sarah's story ultimately became more than just an account of one person's courage in the face of injustice. It became a symbol of the ongoing struggle to create military institutions that truly protected all service members while maintaining the discipline and order necessary for effective operations. Her willingness to risk everything to protect others had not only changed her own life, but had contributed to reforms that would protect countless others in the years to come. The legacy of that moment when Sarah Martinez knocked out Sergeant Major Rick Donovan in front of 1,000 witnesses continued to resonate throughout the military establishment, serving as a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of military service is the courage to do what is right, regardless of the personal consequences.